we'll get started. So good afternoon and welcome everyone. This is the third in the KP Industry Hours speaking series. My name is Dr. Donna Salvaggio. I'm the Chief Librarian and I'm the point of contact from the Faculty Forum Committee on Community Affairs. I'd like to begin by recognizing the contributions of the KP class of 1969 and that of the Academy liaison, Captain Peter Kale. I'm here to introduce you to our distinguished speaker, Mr. Alec Adams, KP class of 2021. During his talk, he'll tell you a bit more about his life and what he's doing now. His topic is logistics and global supply chains. Welcome, Alec.
Thank you for the introduction, and thank you to class of 69 and Captain Kale and everybody that is a part of the KP Digital Initiative and provides these chances for alumni like me to speak. So we'll get right into it. All right, so today's topic for the presentation is logistics and global supply chains. I'm Alec Adams. I'm a Marine Superintendent at New Orleans Terminal, and I graduated less than a year ago, KP class of 2021. And so the main focus of today will be about technologies and softwares utilized on the shoreside end of the supply chain. So a quick overview of today's presentation. I'll go a little further into my background as an introduction, and then I'll touch on New Orleans Terminal and what we really do at New Orleans Terminal, and then about my job. I know a lot of people hear Marine Superintendent, and that can entail different job descriptions depending where you are or where you're working, and so I'll touch on what exactly I do, and then the big ticket item for today's presentation will be the software and technology I use at work. And then some of the faculty and staff asked me to touch on shoreside automation. I know there's a lot of talk about autonomous shipping and automation when it comes to vessels, but there's not a lot of talk about the automation on the shoreside end. So I'll touch on that. And then I'll touch on the classes or courses I took at KP that helped get me to this job and that still help me in this job, and then a little bit on professional development. And so a quick background about myself. As already stated, I'm a 2021 graduate of KP. I was a Decky. I majored in maritime logistics and securities, and a lot of those classes really helped me in my job now. I was a 4-year member of the KP football team and Cultural Diversity Club. Shout out to Coach Coop. I saw him log on. He had a great coaching career, and I know the boys took care of business this year and had one of the best records in school history, but I will say it's not undefeated. My first class year, we were undefeated, so that's that. But I also served on the Student Athlete Advisory Committee and Athletic Diversity Inclusion Committee. And first class year, I served the regiment as Regimental Midshipman Activities Officer and Company Morale Officer. And just for the firstclassmen and younger midshipmen, I just want to throw that out there. That's important to keep track of your activities at the academy, what leadership positions you hold, because when you start applying for jobs and even internships, a lot of employers during interviews, they want to know what you did in your college career that may help you in your professional career after you graduate. And so I know a lot of questions I got were, what do you do as a midshipman officer? What was activities officer? And so being able to sit down and tell a potential employer that I worked with the Alumni Foundation and the Commandant's Department to secure funding for a 10-week series of concerts, or secure funding for all the clubs on campus so that we could have more events on campus during COVID since we couldn't leave, and just small things like that can really help you in an interview. And so it just shows potential employers that you have some professional experience other than just being a student or a student athlete. And so I just wanted to throw that in there. And so a little bit about New Orleans Terminal, or NOT. It is one of 2 container terminals within the Port of New Orleans. The other container terminal is operated and ran by Ports of America. And Ports of America has terminals all across the US. They're another great company, and they're our next door neighbor. And then I have a classmate, Jacob Price, working for Ports of America, and we joke about we're competitors, but we service different ships and shipping lines. And so we're really just neighbors, and we share equipment and have different clientele per se. But NOT primarily works with and services Maersk, Seaboard, and Mediterranean Shipping Company. And the terminal has serviced break bulk ships in years past. I've only been working on the terminal since August, and from my knowledge, the container terminal hasn't serviced a break bulk ship in about 2 years, but we do get inquiries about how much it might cost to service and do cargo operations for a break bulk. So it's still a possibility, which is kind of weird for me to think about because I haven't seen it yet. And I work at a container terminal, but we will do cargo ops for a break bulk. And so a quick overview of the company structure. This is just a very broad overview of the company structure, just to make it a little easier to present on certain topics within the company. But from the top down, we have our Chief Executive Officer. He mostly deals with securing or continuing contracts with the different shipping lines, the Maersk, Seaboard, and Mediterranean Shipping Company. And so we have contracts with those 3 shipping lines. One of the most recent, not necessarily an issue, but just something that was heavily talked about, was we had a crazy lineup of Mediterranean Shipping Company ships that were rolling through back to back to back. I think it was 4 back-to-back MSC ships. And we have allotted space for empty containers for only MSC. And because we had such a crazy lineup of, I think it was 4 or 5 back-to-back MSC ships, they were asking for more space to store empty containers. And at the time, we couldn't do it. And it was an issue with the contract. And so that was just interesting to see the emails back and forth and see how my executive officer deals with contracts and keeping relationships open. Our general manager mostly deals with personnel. And so within company, he will take over for the executive officer if necessary and deal with our clients and the shipping lines if necessary. And then I fall under more of the VP of operations. He's my next point of contact after my manager. And so he kind of oversees all the department levels, which include the marine department, which is where I would fall under, the yard, gate, rail, M&R, maintenance and repair, the mechanic shop, and the reefer department. And so a quick map. The best picture I could find for a map, but the tough part about the terminal is it's located on a bend of the Mississippi River. And so that makes it geographically harder to have a square layout of the yard and containers. I know my first sailing as a cadet, I was on a Maersk container ship, and we went to Savannah and Algeciras, Spain. I remember those just being massive container terminals with huge container yards that were very square or rectangular, which just made it a lot more simplistic to store containers in the yard. And so we have it a little tricky. To the left, you can see the highlighted portion is Ports America. We do share some space and some stacks in the yard with Ports America when we have to, when things get a little tight. But the container yard is separated by a row system. So it goes rows A through J, but there's no I row. I do not know why there's no I, but there's no I. And then we have the K yard, which is all empties or damages. And then towards the bottom left, the Marine Department office is a little mobile trailer as their office. I spend most of my time outside overviewing or overseeing the ship operation. And then to the left of that, you can see our 2 cranes. I have some pictures later in the slideshow, but the port itself just got 5 new cranes, which New Orleans Terminal and Ports America will be sharing. And so they brought them in on a huge heavy lift ship, and it was interesting to see how they took them off the ship and then constructed them on the pier side. And then New Orleans Terminal does have a couple warehouses, and you can see our power shop, maintenance and repairs in the top right corner. We have our rail yard, and then reefer. And then up top, where you see the inbound lanes in the gatehouse, the gatehouse and the yard basically work together. We'll have over the road trucks coming in to either pick up a load or drop off a load. And so the gatehouse and the yard manager have to work closely together to make sure that over the road truckers know exactly where they're going. I know I face a lot of frustrations with, I'll be supervising a ship working, and during the day, Monday through Friday, when we have over the road trucks coming and going, they cause a lot of traffic within the yard, and that slows down the production for my vessel because I have labor driving terminal-owned trucks through the crane lanes and through the yard. And so when we have high frequency of over the road trucks, it just makes everything a lot harder. So I actually prefer working overnight or on the weekends just because I can boost my productivity for the ship. And then, so moving on to more about the job itself. So what is a Marine superintendent exactly? The term Marine superintendent is very easily interchangeable with cargo planner. Depending where you go at different ports or terminals, it may be, the job title may be cargo planner instead of superintendent. I know most of the time when I walk on a ship and the gangway watchstander asks me, like, hey, who are you? Do you have ID? And I tell them I'm the superintendent. They look at me dazed and confused. And then I tell them I'm the planner. And they're like, oh, okay. And so it's just kind of funny how different terminology, different places, different ships goes a long way and can trip people up and cause confusion. But to keep it simple, my primary responsibilities are pre-planning of vessel cargo operation and supervising all aspects of the cargo operation for the duration of the operation. And so I think the longest stint I've been at work was about 21 hours straight. The cargo operation itself went about 18 hours. And then I'm usually in the office about an hour and a half before. And then after the operation finishes, it just depends how long it takes me to submit all the paperwork into our database and run the payrolls and all of that. And so I've definitely gotten quicker at it and can time it up better. But if a cargo operation is going over 18 hours, as in the actual time that cargo is being loaded or discharged goes over 18 hours, we'll split it up between multiple superintendents so that you don't end up at work for 24 plus hours. They used to, before I started, once you're assigned a ship, you're assigned a ship. So no matter what, if it went 24, 30 hours, whatever it was your ship and your responsibility. But now they break it up so that hopefully you don't have to be at work for 18 or 20 plus hours. And then my Marine office, we're staffed by 6 superintendents and my Marine manager. So there's basically 5 other me's doing the same job, and we rotate. Right now, it's a 6-person rotation. So assuming no one's on vacation or taking leave, we just rotate to the 6-man roster. And so each ship that comes up, you get assigned that ship. And then you don't have to work another shift for 4 or 5 shifts as long as no one takes vacation or is on leave. But my manager is currently looking at shifting to a partner-based rotation. It's been a while since the terminal has had a full marine office of 6 superintendents. There's been short-staffed. There's short-staffed going into COVID, and then we all know COVID did not help with any staffing problems. And so we're looking at doing a partner-based rotation to where, for example, I'd be working with another superintendent for the entirety of the month. And so it just helps to break up the workload. So if you're working an 18-hour vessel, if somebody is mentally just tired, they can take a break, go get something to eat, and there's still another superintendent there to oversee the operation. And then also, I've been in situations where there's an incident, where there's an accident, damage to equipment, or an injury. When that happens, the operation could shut down, or the operation could keep going, but you still have to take pictures, file the claim, type up the report. You might have to order a drug test if it was an operator, things like that. And so it's very hard to manage both an ongoing operation and then also do what's necessary to properly file the incident report. And so shifting to a partner-based rotation will help alleviate a lot of that. And so I put day-to-day in parentheses because nothing is the same day-to-day. As we all know in the maritime industry, schedules never stay the same. Most of the time, schedules get pushed back, ships get delayed due to cargo ops, due to weather. They have to change course to avoid storms. I know in the Gulf Coast and ports like Houston and in New Orleans, fog is a big issue, especially coming up the Mississippi River. And so we're just kind of getting out of fog season, but there's a solid month and a half to 2 months as the weather changed from the end of the summer into fall into winter. We just saw some crazy fog on the Mississippi River, and so ships would get delayed 24 to 48 hours just because the pilots couldn't take the ships up the river. And so no day is the same at my job, just like if you're out at sea, no day is ever the same either. But when I'm assigned a vessel, basically 16 to 24 hours before the vessel is due to arrive at the terminal and start cargo operations, the superintendent will plan or stow the vessel. And so my manager's always trying to keep the schedule as updated as possible. He will continually email and call shipping lines, their agents, and their vessel planners to get updated information and make sure he's passing along updated information to us. But each shipping line provides the terminal with arrival files and departure or loadout files. And so the arrival files basically tell you what's already loaded on the ship and what the ship cargo layout looks like presently and as that ship shows up, and then also tells us what we're discharging from that ship. And then we'll have our CIC or clerk in charge back check all the discharge information. And so he'll go back and forth with the shipping line to ensure that we're all on the same page before any planning or stowing is started. And then the loadout or departure files basically tells me what am I loading and where the shipping line would like me to have it loaded. It's a little bit of back and forth based on what the shipping line or the ship wants and what we can physically do as a grounded operation, and physically based on where containers and cargo are at in the yard. And so it's a lot of give and take and a lot of emailing back and forth saying, hey, we can, or hey, we can't accommodate you in this regard, but how about this? Are you okay with this? And so it's very back and forth. Communication is key. But so the superintendent's stowage plan, as I said, is based on the files and information provided by the shipping line. And then once I've completed the stowage plan, I send it back to the shipping line. Each shipping line has their own form our own version of a cargo planner. And so I know Maersk calls it their central cargo planning office. And then Mediterranean Shipping Company, they have an office of 3 individuals for their North American ships that basically respond to everything. And they're just called planners. And so, like I said earlier, different ships, different companies, different places have different terminology and titles for the same people who do the same job. But once I finish my storage plan, I'll send it back to the shipping line and ask for their approval. Hopefully they approve it in one go, and then I'll try to email it to the ship so that the chief officer or captain can look at it ahead of time and then provide any changes or request any changes they would like or approve it. And so this is just a quick screenshot of our system called Spinnaker, which I'll get into more of exactly what Spinnaker is, but the arrival files I mentioned earlier, as you can see in the highlighted corner, this is a discharge view of the ship looks like. And so from a quick glance, this can tell me how the ship is loaded. I already know that in Bay 70, there's no cargo. In Bay 2, there's probably less than 5 containers and probably 20 footers in Bay 2. And so at a quick glance, I can look at this and I can know where cargo is. And in this discharge view, I can tell what containers or how many containers are coming off. And so if you look at the arrows above and below the ship, the arrows above the ship are speaking the cargo on deck, and then vice versa, everything below the ship is speaking the cargo below deck. But the up arrows indicate how many containers are being discharged from that bay, and then the down arrows indicate how many containers will be loaded or are being requested to be loaded in that container. And then this giant list to the right, we have a couple different lists, but basically the discharge list. Below this, we can see how many containers. You can see the color scheme of Maersk operated or Maersk owned containers, and then at the bottom you see an MSC owned container. But that helps us match up with the entirety of the color scheme of the ship, of where containers are at and where they're going. And then vice versa, this is still the same system in Spinnaker, looking at the same ship, but in stowage mode. And so then in our load list, when I'm stowing the ship, the port of discharge shows up on the left, and based on the same color scheme, I know that all these tan containers are being discharged in the port of Algeciras, and that matches up with the actual bays. And so as I'm stowing the ship, I can go quick and just highlight containers, and I already know which bay they're supposed to go in. And so it's very helpful. And then you can also see where the current position of the containers are in the yard. And then for the discharge, you can see their current position on the ship. And so I know if you had Captain Rock for dry cargo, you know exactly what these positions mean. Bay roads here. That is probably the best lesson or best thing I ever learned at KP is bay roads here, because I got on a container ship as my first cadet ship, and now I work for a container terminal working with container ships. So shout out to Captain Rock. And you can also see the bills of lading as well. And so I know if you had Professor Bill Martin for logistics management, he loves his bills of lading. And so it's just goes to show a lot of the classroom stuff comes back to post-graduation careers and the real world. But continuing on, and so this just shows how I would sequence a ship. And so this is in discharge mode, but basically I number each container coming off, and the crane operators, the truck drivers, and the clerks and the deckmen all have tablets, and it's basically the same screen that I'm looking at on my computer is what they're looking at their tablets. And so as the crane operator picks up the first box and discharges it, he can punch it off, and the clerk can punch it off, saying it's kind of two-way factor. The crane operator can punch it off, and the clerk can punch it off, and then on my system, on my computer, I'll see that, boom, the first 10 boxes have already been discharged on bay 58, and that's how I can keep up with the operation without having to go up and down and go on the ship and try to count containers, because that's just not practical. And then vice versa, selling the ship, before I move any containers onto the ship, this is what it will look like. So just as an example, this is bay 54 on one of the most recent ships I worked. But basically, the arrival and departure files I mentioned, I'll bring those in and load them or upload them into Spinnaker, into the software, and then the departure or loadout files tell me that the shipping line is requesting X amount of 40-foot containers going to this port to be loaded in this bay. And so then I can just highlight them on my load list. I can double check where they are exactly in the yard, and then I can simply just punch them in. And again, with the sequencing, the crane operator and the clerks, they can punch off boxes just like they do on discharge. As they load them, they can punch them off saying, boom, box number TCLU 46 2010 0 has been loaded on the ship. And then again, it's a two-way factor cross-check system. And so you have crane operator punching out boxes, the clerk punching out boxes, and then I can see it on my end from my computer screen. And so with Spinnaker, I mean, that's kind of the day before stuff, the pre-planning stage. And so then the day of the actual vessel operation, the superintendent that's working that vessel is tasked with making labor order calls, basically to confirm with the labor unions that the ship is still set to arrive at the original time, or you make a call and say, hey, the ship is delayed, there's fog on the river, everything's pushed back 6 hours. And so this is basically just to ensure that we have all the labor that's needed and that we can actually work the vessel in a efficient manner. I usually get to the office, really we're supposed to be at the office at least an hour before. I'm usually there about an hour and a half before cargo operations start, just because if the shipping line comes back with any last second changes, which doesn't happen all the time, but it can very much happen, that they might have approved something and then a few hours later, when you're out of the office, or because I know Mayor's Central Cargo office is in Singapore, I think. When they're in the office, I'm usually asleep. And so they'll come back to like, hey, actually, we need these changes. And so then I wake up, and if a shift is supposed to start at 07 and I'm waking up trying to get to the office at 05:30, I'm not going to see that email or those changes requested until I get to the office or I check my email. And so I try to get to the office at least an hour and a half early just so I can make any changes, and then I can get the paperwork printed and organized and ready for an on-time start. And then also I have to go speak to the chief mate before cargo operations commence. And just because the shipping line approved the cargo plan, it's still up to the ship to also approve it. And so that's just something I keep in mind. I try to make the plan always start with as much discharge as possible, because the chief officer is never going to say, no, you can't discharge cargo, because they don't necessarily have a say in what's being discharged, but they do have a say of what's being loaded where. And so I've had situations where it's a back and forth with the chief mate for like the first 2 hours of the cargo operation. And luckily it's been all discharged for the first 2 hours. So I have time to go back and forth, change the plan, go back on the ship, talk to the chief mate, be like, hey, is this cool? are you on board? Do you approve? And they say yes or no. They say yes, we're good to go. I just reprint some paperwork and pass it out. If they say no, I have to run back down the gangway, back into the office, and figure out some more revisions. And so it always depends on the chief mate or the ship. Sometimes the chief mate will be like, hey, I don't like this. I recommend you do this, which saves me a lot of time. But sometimes the chief mate will say, I have too many lashing force errors. But in our system, in Spinnaker, I can't see the individual ship lashing errors. And so then I have to kind of make a shot in the dark of where I should move cargo to alleviate that problem. And so it really depends on the chief mate and on the ship and how helpful or not they can be to help me get the ship underway. And then at the end of cargo operation, one of the hardest parts is I'm actually responsible for calling the agent to set the pilot time. And so with about 60 moves left to go in the cargo operation, I know that's about 2 hours of work to be done. And so that's when I call the port agent or the shipping agent. Hey, we have 2 hours before cargo completion. Let's set the pilot time from 3 hours from now. So that gives the ship about an hour of nothing going on so they can get the gangway up and get ready to take a piloting gun underway. But sometimes it's hard to make a judgment call. A crane might go down. I've had it where a crane goes down in the last hour, and then I have to call and try to cancel a pilot and try to avoid the terminal being charged for canceling a pilot or things like that. And so you're racing against the clock sometimes, and then sometimes you're just making your best judgment call and hoping that nothing crazy goes wrong. I can't help the crane breaking down, but I know the crane operators and I know their average moves per hour and things like that. And so that little knowledge is what really helps you with the job. And so getting more into the nitty gritty of the software used. So Tideworks technology is a comprehensive terminal operating system. They promote themselves as a full service provider for terminal operating systems and solutions for growing marine and intermodal logistics. And then Spinnaker, which I touched on earlier and showed the screenshots, is basically our graphic planning software and what we use to plan and stow ships. Also, the rail superintendents and rail cargo planners, they use the same application, Spinnaker, to plan cargo being discharged or loaded on the rail. And then as well as the yard will use Spinnaker to plan out how they discharge or load cargo for over-the-road trucks. And then traffic control is an equipment dispatch tool / system, and that allows us to keep inventory control and prioritize moves. I do not have to use traffic control that much. That's more for the yard and the gatehouse with over-the-road trucks. But sometimes it comes up and I have to know how to navigate through the system. And then mainsail is basically a flex platform that we use to track boxes, manage, and track bills of lading. And so if I'm planning a ship and I see there's a whole group of containers that don't have a bill of lading or a booking number, I have to go mainsail and try to track that down. Or if a shipping line comes back and they say, hey, box number, whatever was supposed to be loaded on the ship that just left your terminal 2 days ago, we're showing it's not on the ship. And sometimes we were supposed to have that container on the terminal, but it never got to us. And there's a mix up somewhere, or somebody didn't update mainsail. And so that bill of lading and that container was lost in the system. And then Forecast is a web portal that simplifies communications between the terminal and the shipping lines and also trucking companies. It's kind of like a one-stop all location for us as a terminal, but also customers, truckers, and shipping lines. And then Insight is a self-service data platform, which is used for us. We use it to track and analyze data in real time, and it just helps us consolidate data, and so that we can basically send all our data points to one location, which is Insight, and then the higher managers use that to look at future budgets and inventory and just data analysis. And so this, again, is Spinnaker. This is just another feature of Spinnaker, and this is in the yard view. And so I don't have to use this as much, but sometimes when I'm trying to see where specific cargo is, I go to the yard view and I can see, I think this color code, the neon pink, is for Shanghai. And so if I'm loading a ship or stowing a ship, and I know I have to load 150 boxes that will eventually be discharged in Shanghai, and I know that Shanghai's color code is neon pink, I can go in the yard view and it helps me know, okay, I'm probably gonna be pulling most of these boxes from row J4, and then I may need to pull some more boxes from H4. And so it's just a quick overview and just helps to give you a visualization. And so just continuing on software we utilize, we have our NOT control panel. It's basically a custom design software that our in-house IT personnel basically made from scratch using Microsoft Excel and Access. And it's a love-hate relationship because it's great, but also it's so intricate that if you mess something up, it's really sensitive. And I've called our IT guy before at like 4 in the morning because I was trying to leave work and I couldn't figure it out. And he'll be like, yep, just give me 10 minutes and he'll get online. And then it ends up being something super simple, but it's a lot easier for him to figure it out because he actually made the software or the program from scratch. And then like many organizations and businesses, we use Outlook email, which I know everyone at KP is familiar with, and then Microsoft Teams for meetings. And we'll do a safety meeting every month. And so instead of making everybody come in the office, we can do it on Microsoft Teams and have a video chat just like we do on Zoom. But especially for the Marine department, if you're not working at ship that day, you really don't want to come into the office for a 30-minute safety meeting. And so Microsoft Teams helps us to have the option to, if you're not already at work, not to have to come into work. And so some of the technology we use, I've mentioned already the tablets and handhelds that are used by clerks, the truck operators, and the crane operators to punch off moves. And then it simultaneously updates into Spinnaker and traffic control in real time. And so I know exactly when a container gets discharged or loaded, and it just automatically pops up on my system. And then iPhones, everyone loves their smartphone, but NOT provides us with work phones just so it's easier and it simplifies company communications in-house. And so sometimes you gotta call people at 3 in the morning when a crane breaks down, and it's a lot easier when people have a strict work number, and then you don't have to worry about people's personal numbers. And if someone changes their personal number or whatever, their work phone is not gonna change. And then we're all have company laptops and PCs. And so for cybersecurity, we are required to use a VPN to access the NOT control panel software and the database hard drives. And so that's just general cybersecurity to make sure nothing gets leaked. And I'm not quite sure what somebody would want to do with my information about cargo or where cargo is stowed on a ship, but you never know. And obviously people smuggle things all the time and in various ways. And so cybersecurity is nevertheless important. And so just touching on a little bit of shoreside automation, New Orleans terminal is pretty much a grounded operation. We do not have a lot of self-automation. Like I said, with the tablets, somebody still has to be in the crane or a clerk has to be on the ground to physically punch off the box or the container, discharging or loading for it to show up in the system. And we don't have any automated cranes or trucks or any equipment like that. But my manager used to work for the Virginia Port Authority, and I was talking to him, and this Virginia Port Authority might be the best example of shoreside automation in the U.S. One of the bigger highlights to note are their automated stacking cranes. So basically, they're mounted on a rail, but require no operator, and they're used for yard stacking and in-stack transportation. So if you're putting a container on top of a chassis going with a over-the-road truck. But the research and data shows that less money and time is spent because you don't have to run extra shifts. You don't have to hire more labor when you go over labor contracts or when you exceed the amount of time that one individual can be operating a crane. And so if it's all automated or backed by a computer, the automated process can run a crane for hours on end, and you don't have to worry about an operator being fatigued or tired. And then that also leads to less burnout of labor when there are delays. And so, again, I was asked to include automation. It'd be kind of cool if we had more automation at New Orleans terminal that I could speak on firsthand, but unfortunately we do not. And then just touching on education and the KP curriculum. Again, I had a couple of faculty and staff members ask me to touch on this, but the classes or courses I took at KP that aided in my progression into this career, I already mentioned dry cargo with Captain Rock. Bay Road Tier will never leave my mind because he instilled that in my head, just like I know he did many other people. But port and terminal ops, I took that first class year. I think it's first trimester with Professor McClellan, I think I had. But that was really the only class I had that was directly correlated with working at a terminal. And so it would be interesting to see if more classes like that could be incorporated in the curriculum. And obviously, I understand that would take a lot of time to be able to change the curriculum or add and or take away courses, but just something to think about. And then other courses like logistics management, maritime economics, and principles of management, or just classes I remember taking throughout my KP career, and the information just came back after graduation in my career post-graduation. And so those are just 5 classes that I remember and that really helped me. And I think it would be beneficial for midshipmen, especially the logistics and security majors, if they had more, not necessarily more options, but could choose a little bit of their schedule. So I know I took a lot of business courses, different business law courses, admiralty law course, finance, and like marketing and accounting. And so all those classes are important, and I enjoyed some of those classes because eventually I want to go to grad school and possibly get an MBA. But at the same time, it could be beneficial if midshipmen had the choice to pick some of those classes as electives. And then if they really wanted it to be business oriented, they could take more business and finance and marketing classes, and vice versa. If they wanted to get more into logistics or the shoreside opportunities, they could focus more on courses like port and terminal ops or logistics management or something like that. And then just professional development for any shoreside transition, whether it's right after graduation or if you sail for a little bit and then trying to go shoreside. Also, I think me being here and my job goes to show that even if you go deck, you can still work shoreside. I know early in my KP career, a lot of people are like, oh, if you want to work shoreside, you got to go engine. If you go deck, you're going to have to sail after graduation and then go back to grad school and then go shoreside and stuff like that. There's options for deckies and engineers and everybody out there. So don't let somebody else persuade you to go a different major or tell you can't do a certain job because of your major. But professional development should never end. And some skills that I've kind of learned shortly after graduation that I need to continue to build on include technology management skills. That has a lot to do with like Microsoft Office, Excel, Word, and in this day and age, basically any job you pursue, you're going to need those technical skills. And then soft skills, that goes more into critical thinking, public speaking, professional and or technical writing, and then diversity and flexibility. You need to be able to adapt to the needs of the team, organization, business, the ship, whatever it may be. And so for me, my job, we normally have 2 cranes working on a ship, which means we have 2 gangs, and one gang has 20 people. And so normally I'm overseeing 40 different longshoremen, crane operators, foremen, lashers, all that. And then in the office, we have 5 more clerks. And so any ship operation, I'm usually overseeing 45 people. And so you have to be flexible and see the concerns and needs of different people. And again, every day is different. And so the labor unions we use are big. And so you don't always get the same gang of labor. And so that just changes from every ship. And so you have to be able to, one, recognize that and then adapt to who's working in what position. And then out-centric leadership, basically just being able to ensure that everyone knows the why behind the work. And so sometimes I'll have crane operators or a clerk ask me, hey, Soup, why were we doing this right now? Like, why did you plan the stowage this way? And then I'll tell them, hey, like, to look at bay 58 and then look at what's going on bay 50. I know you'd rather just run all the empties and throughout the sequence, but it's going to trip us up when we move 2 bays down. And then sometimes like, oh yeah, good call. And so sometimes you have to explain like, hey, like, this is my thought process. Like, do you disagree, or like, do you have something better? And obviously I've only been working since August, so I definitely rely on some crane operators and clerks and some other labor. I'll ask them like, hey, what do you think? Like, should I change this or should we keep it? What do you think is gonna be more efficient? Because at the end of the day, I'm trying to allow the cargo operation to be as efficient and productive as possible. And then I feel like very recently, emotional intelligence in regards to leadership has been a hot topic. And so just being able to understand, use and manage your own emotions, and then understand other people's emotions and use that in a positive way to relieve stress, communicate effectively, empathize with others, and overcome challenges, and just overall diffuse conflict in our workplace. And so I just want to touch on that. And then I think that concludes the presentation. And then I'll take any questions anyone has at this time. And also, I threw in a couple of pictures. I talked about the port got 5 new cranes, and this is the heavy lift ship that came on. And so it's pretty impressive to see that. And then they barely made the clearance to get under the Mississippi River Bridge. So that was pretty cool. It's a little nerve-wracking to watch.
Nobody's going to ask a question. I am. I come from the dark ages. I worked for the company that invented containerization, and we had a guy on the dock called the checker. He sat in his little shack. He watched I Love Lucy, and he wrote down the numbers of every container that was offloaded on the ship. Longshoreman. How is it done? How do you know when use the term? I forget the term you used. When the vessel discharges the container, how does that number of the container? How do you physically track it? Is there a code on it, or RFID transmitter? Is there somebody who types it in? How does that get done?
So we have, so I guess the equivalent to the checker from back when you were talking about, we have a deck man for each gang or each crane. And so when I talk about I prepare the paperwork and I print the paperwork, the screenshots of Spinnaker where, which I can just go back to share screen, but so I'll go to discharge mode. So looking at the software, when I print the paperwork for the deckman and the crane operators and the clerk and the whole gang, even though most of them have a tablet, they also get this paperwork printed. And so when I print the paperwork, it's basically the same screenshot of Bay 58, just printed out, and they can see the individual box numbers. And so as a deckman, his job would be, okay, this box in position 58, 17, 90 is the first box being discharged. And so as the crane discharges it, he's physically looking at it and making sure that that box number and that box on the ship matches with the paperwork. And then same thing with the clerk that's on the ground. As the crane places that container on the back of a truck, they're physically looking at the container, at the back of the container, or wherever they can see the container number, and looking at their paperwork and their tablet and making sure the numbers or the container numbers match up. And then if not, they'll be on the radio and be like, hey, superintendent, there's a problem. The containers aren't matching up with the paperwork. We got that information. So usually if that happened, it would be the shipping line or the previous port put a container in the wrong spot, and then we'd have to visually try to figure out, okay, like what's going on, where are these containers, where are they supposed to be?
Oh, thank you. Right away. And in the dark ages, we had to go in that container later. And what was in that container? A toilet paper. Thank you for answering that question. A very thorough answer. Thank you.
This is Tim Ferdinand. Thank you again, Alec. Like I said, it's just so good to see you doing so well in the real world of maritime industry, using what you learned at the academy and continuing your career and the professional growth so successfully. I do have a question for you. You mentioned that you changed the plans the last minute. I just wonder what are some of the main or key parameters you consider to optimize your plan?
I would say when I'm first starting to plan out a ship, I'll look at the load list and I'll look at the files that the shipping line sent. And so when I upload everything into Spinnaker, I can kind of see what is supposed to go on the ship. And then I didn't include this in the presentation, but we usually get what's called a long hatch assessment. And so I'll print that out, and it just basically tells me how many containers are being discharged in each bay, and then how many containers are supposed to be loaded in each bay. And so if I know I have two gangs, I'm gonna have two cranes working the ship, I'll kind of just do some math either in my head or like write it down and be like, okay, I need to find an even split. If there's 1,370 moves total, I'm trying to get each gang to have exactly half of that, because in theory, they should work at the same productivity level and then finish at the same time. But I also want to make sure that each gang has almost the same amount of discharge as they do loads, because just the nature of what it is, discharging containers goes a lot faster. Or if there's a lot of 20-foot containers being loaded we can do what's called a twin pick, where the crane can pick up to 20-foot containers at one time. And so things like that is what I try to like look at before I start planning. So how many twin picks can I get? What's the split? Are we gonna have to go with like 2 gangs for a full day, and then for half the night drop down to 1 gang, because the 2 cranes can only get so close together. So if there's been a lot of times where there'll be like between 2 bays is majority of the work, but you can't have the cranes that close together to work 2 bays right next to each other. And so like, you have to take that into consideration. Okay, like I might have to knock off 1 gang at night and just finish with 1 gang for the rest of the night and things like that. So it's kind of long-winded answer, but the split, number of twin picks, is there more discharge? Is there more loading? Where is the work? Is there work in mostly one proportion of the ship? So things like that.
Thank you, Alec.
Thank you. Alec, thank you very much for a great presentation, and congratulations on your job. I was interested when you looked at, you were looking at the software that you have in the terminal, to understand what stakeholders have access to that software. Does the ship have direct access to that? Is that how they transfer the load and discharge plan?
So as far as like Spinnaker and the software I use primarily to load or plan a ship, we really are the only ones that have access to that, because it's everything I save is saved on our terminal hard drive. And so I mentioned earlier, from home I have to use a VPN to get to the hard drive and log in. But the shipping line it's called a BAPLI, and it's just a form of a file. So it's not like a Word document or an Excel file, but it's called a BAPLI. And so they'll send the arrival BAPLI, and that shows me what's on the ship and what's being discharged. And then they'll also send loadout or departure instructions, and then another BAPLI that's usually called the move-ins. And that's where, once I upload that into Spinnaker, it will generate the load list. And so the shipping line doesn't necessarily have access to Spinnaker or see what I see on Spinnaker, but I can export my Spinnaker into a BAPLI file and then email it to the shipping line and be like, hey, this is our pre-stow plan. Please email back with approval or request any revisions you may need. And so.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask one more question? We saw recently in the press, American Patriot is looking to develop a inland container shipping service from New Orleans up the river with about 1,800 TEU container ships, hoping to help develop New Orleans as a larger port and to take traffic away from other U.S. East and West Coast ports. I was just wondering if you're familiar with it, or is there any discussion about how viable this particular project may be in New Orleans?
I think I'm tracking on what you're asking. There's been a lot of different talks, and so I appreciate the question. I can't speak to specifics, like I don't have the knowledge, but I know both New Orleans Terminal and Ports America are trying to, as much as we can, expand. And then right now we see a lot of delays. A lot of the ships I work come from Houston, and so we see a lot of delays out of Houston. And I know people higher than me at the terminal and at the port are like, hey, forget about Houston, like come to us, we'll take the work, we'll do it. And so yeah, it's a little back and forth. And so the Port of New Orleans is a little smaller than, you know, Savannah or Houston or LA, but we're trying to grow and we want all the work we can get. And so.
Okay, thank you.
Hello. Hello, this is Professor Guan. How are you doing?
I'm good. How you doing, Professor Guan?
Thank you very much for your presentation. And this is very, very fascinating. I have a few questions regarding the terminal operation because myself used to work at the terminal and as a marine superintendent. I just wonder that number one, that is there any optimizations built into this software? Second, I'm interested in how the your software that you're using stack up against, should I say, Navis, uh, and any like potential labor unions issues you encounter. So if you could shed some lights on this, I would highly appreciate it.
Yeah, so I'm not really sure about too much about optimization. I know because eventually there's breakdowns in communication, and so the crane operator or the clerk might be punching off boxes on the tablet as they go, but sometimes there's just a server disconnect, and after an hour or so, I'll double check and see that nothing's been punched off, but I'll look out the window, or I'll already be outside in the truck just supervising and watching. I'm like, okay, the crane's working, they're definitely moving boxes. Why is nothing showing up in Spinnaker, like on my system? And then I'll go get with the clerk or radio the clerk or crane operator and just ask them, hey, what's going on? I see boxes moving, but I don't see them being punched off in the system. And they're like, hey, I have the tablet, I'm punching it off. But sometimes the network is down. We get emails saying network disconnect, and then we have to call Tidework customer support or customer tech support. And sometimes it's like 3 a.m. and we're doing overnight ops. And so, yeah, I'm just not too sure about software optimization, just because we do contract some of the software you use.
Excuse me, I think I'm losing you. Okay. Hello.
Kind of breaking up there, Professor Guan.
I don't know if you can hear him or if he can hear you, but he had also asked about how Spinnaker compares to another software that to me sounded like Navis, but I'm not familiar with the other software. Someone might be able to correct me.
Yeah, I think he said Navis, but I'm not too familiar with that system or software either, and so I can't compare it really. But it's a good question. I wish I had the background knowledge to be able to compare the two different softwares.
Does anyone else have any questions? You can just unmute yourself if you do.
Hi, Alex.
Yeah, way. How are you doing?
Oh my God, Alex, good to see you.
You too, man.
Great to see you come back, and congratulations on your achievement. So far so good. You like the job?
Yes, ma'am. So far, so good. And so it's a big learning curve, but I'm getting settled.
I know you mentioned that now you 40 people. Wow.
Yes, ma'am. So
it's a great challenge, right?
Yeah, and so it's gonna end up being more people because as I mentioned, show the pictures of the new cranes we got. I just got back from I did PCI for my reserve commitment, and I just got back from that. And so before I left 2 weeks ago, they had finished construction on 2 of the cranes, and we're working on the other 3. And so once those are operational, we'll be able to use, depending on how big a ship is, we can use 3 or 4 cranes if it need be. And so then that would be an additional 20 people per crane.
Oh, Actually, my question is, well, it doesn't sound like it's going to be an issue because, the issue of the short staffing, since pandemic, right? The short staffing happened pretty much every industry. You heard people complain, all the employers complain about, short staffing issues. So I wonder if that happens in your company.
Yes and no. And so, like I mentioned before, COVID, the Marine office didn't have a full staff of 6 superintendents, and then it was hard to hire people during COVID. And then we just got back. So I was the 5th superintendent hired back in August, and then someone else came on about 6 weeks or 2 months after I did. And so
I
that
see.
for the first time, as a Marine office, they're fully staffed for about 2.5 years, I guess. But as far as labor, for like the union labor, we've had a couple incidences where we're lasher short or we're truck driver short, but it's not something that would derail the whole operation. But I know
Good.
I know the Port of Houston and Port of New Orleans, we basically utilize the same unions. And so this is mostly secondhand knowledge, but I've been talking, or I've heard some of our labor union talk, and they're like, yeah, like drivers don't want to be in Houston. And then I know for over the road truck drivers and a lot of longshoremen, they wanted to be recognized federally as essential employees. And so
Right. Mhm.
and so that's also an issue. It hasn't heavily affected New Orleans, but sometimes when ships get delayed in Houston and they're supposed to come to New Orleans, I hear feedback of, oh, it's because Houston had a labor shortage. And I don't know if that's a fact or not. It's other people in the union saying that. And so I don't necessarily know for a fact, but.
All right, thanks, Alec. Mhm.
All right, we
So you-
probably have time for one more question. Anyone has a question?
Hello. This is
Huh?
Professor Guan again. Somehow I
Mhm.
just lost the connection. Anyway, my questions: how's your productivity, ship's productivity, and the biggest size of ship that your terminal handle?
So the biggest ship we've handled was, I forgot the name of the class, but it's a MSC class, and it's over 1,000. That class of ship is around 1,000 to 1,100 feet long. And then the biggest ship, as far as number of moves that I've worked or had to plan, had over 2,200 moves, and it took me about 5 hours to plan it, just because there was so many moves. And then sometimes you start and you're like, oh no, like you run into a problem and you're like, this is not going to work, and you kind of have to backtrack or restart. And so it took me 5 hours to actually pre-plan it. And then that cargo operation lasted 37 or 38 hours, and I worked the back half of that. And so someone else worked the first 18 hours and I worked the last 18 hours.
I see. What about the productivity? How many moves per hour your crane could or your gang could generate?
So as a terminal, we're looking to average per crane, we're looking to average 32 moves per hour. And so anything over 32 is ecstatic. Love to see it. As long as it's 30 plus, it's good. So like if I'm tracking the crane operators or the cranes and I see each crane's making 30 moves an hour, I'm like, okay, that's fine. But like my manager tries to promote 32 plus hour for 32 plus moves an hour. And so that's partly dependent on me or whatever superintendent plans it, because that has a big thing to do with productivity. And then partly is just how fast the gang's moving. And then partly does it, like if the ship has a damaged cell guide below deck, then it's a struggle. It's for the crane to actually get to the containers. Then obviously that's going to kill productivity. But
I see. Well, thank you very much. This is very, very helpful.
Hey,
thank you for the
Alec,
question.
Alec, this is Admiral Buono. I just wanted to say it's great to see you. It's great to see someone from the famous undefeated 2020 football season. Thanks for everything you've done for the Academy while you were here. It looks like you're off to a stellar career. So congratulations to you. Great presentation. But I just want to remind everybody on the call, you really did a lot to support the Academy, your shipmates, while you were at the Academy with all the activities you were in, Cultural Diversity Club, being part of the Student Council. So thanks again for that, Alec. You're a great representative of this institution. And thanks for a great presentation.
Thank you, sir. I really appreciate that.
I want to echo that. Thank you. And let me see if I could share this. I just want to share with you, we have a certificate of appreciation for you. This is an example of it online here, but we'll also send you a hard copy. And again, on behalf of all of us, thank you so much for your presentation, your talk. Thank you.